Good morning. Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We are on page 1337. Aleph Shin Lamed Zayin. Closer to the bottom of the page. Talking about Gevuros of Atik. Gevuros of Atik, as he explained, Atik is in Ishtalshus is considered the highest level, sometimes even called higher than Ishtalshus. But what he called it was Tachteina Shebemaitzil, this lowest level of the emanator, as there emanate, like we learned earlier in Tzur, the rock, from where originates all of existence. And here in this context, Chsadim of Atik, he said, is the flow of energy. Like he said, the chesed of Arich and Atik is the midas chesed. Well, chesed of Zah, and even higher, chesed of Arich and Atik is the flow of energy that creates and sustains. However, in order for it to be, the flow should reach all the way down to the structure of existence, starting with Atzilus, where you actually have emanations that are more distant than Atzilus is from us. So the structure of the spheres, and even more so the Nivroim. So where's the intensity of the flow come from that it'd be able to carry that chesed all the way downward? That comes from Tagboiris, the Gevuros of Atik. So we have here the role of chesed, oir, and the role of Gvura creating the intensity, and also the ischalkus, the breakdown, firstly, the division of the spheres, both the hidden spheres and the revealed spheres, as he explained the difference in the parentheses. And for sure, Makolshken Sheyisavas and Nivroim, the creation of the Nivroim, which is even more than Atzilus, than Atzolim, than the emanations, and with a multitude of distinction and diversity without endless diversity. So all that, like he explains, as the neshamas come down below, that they retain the Nevroim Lamata should have the capacity, that they should have Ribi Achais. How do they maintain the capacity to have a Ribi Achais, an intensity of divine energy and vitality, like the neshamas and so on, and all the Nevroim before the Chet, when it was revealed? All this calls out Gevuros Atik, which is Tagbeirus Atzmis. Tagbeirus Atzmis, a type of core intensity that comes all the way from the source. Like we learned earlier, he didn't say yet Helam Atzmi, but its ultimate root is in the Helam Atzmi. Right now he's calling it Gvura because we're focusing on the intensity component, the Gvura Atzmis, Tagbeirus Atzmis, as he explained, beginning on page 1334. Just to give a little more background as far as sources go, I looked a little more into it. So on page 1334, the Rebbe Rashab already indicated, L'Kutei Torah, the mimer, it's a mimer in Achrei. In L'Kutei Torah, the mimer is Ki b'yem hazeh yechaper ha'alef, which is talking about Yom Kippur, which is in Parshas Achrei. So in the first mimer there, he talks about this whole idea of the Tzur, the rock, and the whole story with the Yud Gimel Midas Harachim, the 13 attributes, and the context of the verses that we began learning on the bottom of page 1333, where God says the space is with me, and Moshe stands on the rock, and from there he gets the revelation of the 13 attributes of compassion. That's the whole context here. Because the question that he asked on page 1334 is, what is compassion? How does it come from Tzur? What Tzur is a rock, is hard, is Gvura. Gevuros of Atik, and manifests the Mocha Stima'ah from where the Yud Gimel Tikkun Dikni, Yud Gimel Midas Harachim. So what's the connection? So we're in the middle of this discussion that is coming from a very intense place. Gvura has both interpretations. So the Maimer, L'Kutei Torah, Ki b'yem hazeh yechaper, is the basis of many of these ideas. But looking a little deeper into it, that Maimer was said by the Alter Rebbe on Shabbos Shuvah, and it apparently also connected Yom Kippur that year, Tovkuf Samach Beis. Tovkuf Samach Beis is the equivalent of 1802, I believe. Samach Beis. No, there's not yet. 1802. Well, it would have been 1801 to be exact. And there's also an explanation of this mimer where these two levels of Gvura is spelled out. Everything we talked about, like the animals and the behemoths, the cattle, the difference in Gvura and Chesed. So many of these ideas are really either word for word or an elaboration on a mimer called the explanation of that same mimer of Likutei Torah, Kibiyem Hazeh Yechaper, and it's printed if you want in Eira Torah nowadays, in Eira Torah Yom Kippur in volume 5, if you want to look it up. So that's just some sources for this material. And the ideas we're learning are pretty much spelled out there, with additions, of course. The Rebbe Rashab is definitely adding to it. But it's based a lot on what is discussed in those Maimarim. Okay. That said, let's continue reading. The line begins, Dafke Shubchinis Tagberes Ha'atzmis. This is 2/3 down the page, 1337. The pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. So here's what the Rebbe Rashab continues. So now, if you remember, on the top of 1334, the end of the paragraph, he didn't just say that Tzur is Gvura, the Atik, but he said Gvura is the Atik as it manifests in Mocha Stima'ah. Yesterday, I explained briefly that back in volume 1, he explained that Mocha Stima'ah. Now, Mocha Stima'ah literally means hidden wisdom or hidden intelligence. But essentially, it's the supraconscious state, the root of Mocha Gluya. Moichin is Chochma Bina Das, but specifically Chochma Gluya, which is a Chochma already on consciousness. It's rooted in the supraconsciousness within Arich and Atik. So Mocha Stima'ah, when we say Gevuros of Atik as a manifest of Mocha Stima'ah, he's now going to explain what that means in this next section. But it's continuing from where he began at the end of the paragraph on page 1334. And I'll refer to you one more thing. Okay, no, that's for now, that's enough. Which is the level of Butzina D'Kardunisa. That's what he said. The Tzafta Latzur is Butzina D'Kardunisa, which we called either the hard or the dark spark or dark flame, hard or dark flame. Gvura D'Atik HaMelubash B'Mocha Stima'ah. That's the Kabbalistic terminology. And from Mocha Stima'ah and Moisrei Moichin, from the leftovers, we nurse Moisrei Moichin leftovers is Nimshach, the 13 strands of the beard, as I explained, like the thin wires. That's the 13 attributes of compassion. So we have Gvura of Atik. Well, we have Chesed of Atik, which we discussed. Gvura of Atik, which now manifests in Mocha Stima'ah. Now remember, Mocha Stima'ah generally is referring to the level of Arich, even though there's a Mocha Stima'ah also in Atik. But we're talking about Gevuros of Atik as it manifests in Mocha Stima'ah. So he says like this: Gevuros D'Atik shemelubash b'Mocha Stima'ah. So we just explained Gvura D'Atik is the intensity, the power that pushes, that thrusts forward the energy, the divine energy, to go all the way downward, to create the diversity and division of existence. But it's melubash in Mocha Stima'ah. It manifests in this superconscious state. The Mocha Stima'ah is ha'ascholas ha'atzilus. So Atik, we said, was tachteina shebamaitzel. That's like representing more Ein Sof. So it is already tachteina, true, compared to higher than Atik, it's considered the lowest level. But compared to lower than Atik, it's tachteina shebamaitzel. It's not the beginning of Atzilus. So where's the interface between Gvura of Atik and Atzilus? So he says that is Mocha Stima'ah, is the beginning of Atzilus, and he quotes a Kabbalistic source. As I said, he's one of the classic students of the Arizal, explaining the Zohar according to the Arizal. So in Pasha Emer, Daf Peches, that's what he says. That Mocha Stima'ah is the beginning of Atzilus. What does that mean? Let's spell it out now in simple Chassidus Chabad language. So let's think of it this way. We've talked about the concept of God desiring existence, but there's a level before he desires it, right? Where he's not even aware. It's like awareness has not yet come into play. So on a more microcosmic level, you can say like this: Atik is a very high level. Atik is beyond consciousness. Atik is essentially representing the divine pleasure and the divine, you could say, I don't want to say Nesava because we're not on that highest level, but relatively second, it's the divine essential core wish, if you wish, and pleasure in creating existence. But it hasn't yet been spelled out into any form of structure yet. Even though we said there's the Esespheres Hagnuzis, which is the Esespheres Hagnuzis within Atik, like he said before. What were the exact words he said? Let's see here. But he called them, they're not yet a Metzias. It's more like God envisioning it. Mocha Stima'ah is already, even though it's super conscious, and it's not yet consciousness in the full sense where it's being expressed in a way that's revealed, but within the divine super consciousness, now is already a plan is beginning to develop, which is bringing the Gevuros of Atik and Atik in general into some form of super conscious structure. And that's Mocha Stima'ah. So Mocha Stima'ah is now a step closer to existence. It's still not existence, but it's the Haskalah of Atzilus, like the Ramah says. Uliyas is Savis Eses Spheres Atzilus, Zeo Mepchinas Gevuros the Atik Dafke. And being, in order to create Uliyas, was Cholos Atzilus, Uliyas is Savis Eses Atzilus, Zeo Mepchinas Gevuros the Atik. Like we said before, that in order for there to be the Eses Spheres, you need Gevuros the Atik, because that creates distinction. Chesed is just a unified, seamless flow. For there to be a breakdown, he said clearly up on top, middle of the page, where he brought from Zeo Damchin's Gevuros the Atik, that should be the 10 spheres, whether it's both the revealed spheres and the hidden spheres. That's from Gevuros the Atik. He says, "V'hischalkus zeisu gamkem b'chinas tegberes ha'atzmus, ubefrat ha'hischalkus the Eses Spheres the Atzilus." Okay, so there we have like this. So the Gevuros of Atik are the force that creates diversity, and that manifests in Mocha Stima'ah, which is the beginning of Atzilus. So now it's carrying the Gevuros of Atik through Mocha Stima'ah that will create and emanate the shaped 10 spheres. It's essentially what he added now. That's what Mocha Stima'ah comes to include. So that's the way the flow works. Okay. So now he's going to go back to what he said, what he began the whole discussion on page 1334, which is that this is now the root of the 13 attributes of compassion. Because from Mocha Stima'ah, we learned clearly, Moshe Moichin, not the Moichin itself, because the Moichin itself are very intense. So now come these strands, like here, like thin wires that carry that energy into the Yud Gimel Midas HaRachmim. Now we ask the question, Yud Gimel Samachlim, you say they're coming Rachamim, and you say their root is Tzur Gevura. So why are they called Rachamim? And in addition, they're Rachamim Pshutim. They're shapeless Rachamim. Here we're talking about a narrow flow. And now he's going to answer that question fully. Because we learn now that Gevura has another side to it. Not narrowness, but intensity. So it's the intensity of Gevura that's going to lead to these Yud Gimel Midas HaRachamim. And that's going to show us the power that besides the Gevuros of Atik, through Mocha Stima'ah, creating the existence and bringing the energy all the way downward, as well as the diversity of existence, it also has another power that from there, God reveals the 13 compassion, the 13 attributes of compassion that will, to Moshe Rabbeinu, that will allow the forgiveness of even the harshest sins. That's what he's going to now continue in this discussion. So that's the next piece that we're going to learn now. So he says, "V'zeu gamkein the memochim stimon nimshachin Yud Gimel Midas HaRachmim." And now we'll also understand this is also the reason that from Mocha Stima'ah is drawn or extends the 13 divine attributes of compassion. The liyes slichas avenis, in order for there to be the forgiveness of sins, because How is it possible when God created a system and said, here's a system, you put your hand in fire, you get punished. What does that mean, punished? It's cause and effect. So there's a structure. So in the regular structure of existence, it would seem that a sin would not create, you wouldn't have any compassion, because a sin is disturbing and disrupting existence. So when there's a regular Ein Sof, that's not the B'chinas Ribui, that's in a state of Simtsum and Miut, there you can't have forgiveness. Like they say to err is human, to forgive is divine. When a person makes a mistake, so if you're going to use the same energy where the mistake was made, someone hurts you, it's not so simple. They just say, I'm sorry, you forgive them. They hurt you deeply. You need to dig deeper. So that's what he's saying now, that in order for there to be compassion, in order to forgive sins, you need to go deeper into the root of ishtalshelus. If you're just going to go to the level of chesed, so to speak, where you're only getting the flow of energy that creates existence, but not that intensity of tagbeirus, or Gevuros of Atik, that go into Mocha Stima'ah, that create that something beyond Simtsum and Miut, that form of intensity, then there you can get forgiveness. So essentially, he's saying now the same intensity that created that powerful flow and the diversity, we have to say even deeper than that, is when you reach Yud Gimel Midas HaRachmim, is originating, going all the way back, so to speak, to that source, to the source. Because if you only go to the source of Oyer can only illuminate. And Oyer does not know how to contend with darkness. It can only override darkness, but to transform it, like we're going to be learning, that comes from the Yud Gimel Midas HaRachmim. So he's saying again, the liyes slichas avenis, in order for there to be the forgiveness of sins, you need an intensity. You need a Ein Sof that is more than just the regular flow. That's not subject to Simtsum and Miut, like the lower level of Gvura, for example. So I know he's using the word chesed, but Rav Chesed is one of the Yud Gimel Midas HaRachmim. It means an abundance of chesed, not just chesed. And that's coming from Gevuros of Atik, like we talked earlier. So first of all, you need that type of energy. V'gam, and additionally, it's not just you need that source energy, that powerful source that will forgive, that will, so to speak, be able to forgive a sin, but you also need it to come downward. You need that energy to come all the way down below where there are sins. And that also causes the yerida, that the energy should go down increasingly so, meaning b'yesed, not just a regular yerida for creation purposes, but now you need also to correct. It's like we learned earlier that to heal something, you need, remember we learned about Crevice, like it's like medicine. When a person is healthy, all you need is food. Like we said, re'ech hamaychel, the smell and the aroma of the food or the food itself. But if a person gets sick, you need strong samamonim. You need strong medicines that are more powerful, that could even be hurtful to a healthy person. Why? Because now you need to heal something. The same thing in Ruchnius. When things are going, Odem Yasher Heilach Tzadik, so he has a certain flow of divine energy that sustains him. He doesn't need deeper healing powers. But God forbid, a person who sins, now you need to go deeper to get deeper strengths to heal, and they have to come into this place, like he says. So you need to have something abundant. You need to say to forgive even those that transgressed sins, God forbid, heaven forbid. Like he says, Lukut Teira, the end of the Maimer says Osis, which is in Lukut Teira, Parsha Netzavim. B'Shem HaReishis Chochmah. He says in the name of the Reishis Chochmah, which is a classic work of Kabbalah and of Musar, the Yud Gimel Midas HaRachmim Heimorim Ala Anova, that the 13 attributes of compassion indicate on humility. What is the connection here? So he says, V'hu Anova G'dela V'atzuma. This is a great and awesome humility. Lahashpil Asme Lamata Mata. For God to come down and lower himself down below to those that transgressed against him. Gam lemokim avenis, even a place of sin, a corrupt place, a place that's polluted, that essentially banished God from them. When the Jews built the golden calf, for example, or any other sin, they in a sense pushed away God. So it's a tremendous humility for God to come down to that place, a place where that banished him, that essentially transgressed him, liyes nese oven, to carry the sin, meaning to forgive the sin, umagbia sheyisapche chashechel neher, not only to nese oven, to carry the sin, and elevate it and transform the darkness to light. So that's where the Reshimu Chachma, look at the Torah, brings from Reshimu Chachma, that this is a tremendous anova that comes from even a greater strength in God. And that's all associated to this root of Gevuros Atik. The Amshach zu hi mebchinas Gevuros Atik hamalubish b'meiches Stima'ah. This transmission, this powerful transmission, is coming from the intensity of Atik that manifests in Meiches Stima'ah. Now, again, for the record, this is almost word for word language from the Maimer of the Alter Rebbe, Tovkuf Samach Beis, especially as it's explained by the Tzemach Tzedek in the beer that I mentioned before. So, therefore, you see the language, if you think about it, you see it's a pretty short language, very, very similar to the style of the Alter Rebbe and Tzemach Tzedek, especially the Alter Rebbe. But that's the point he's making here. So you have to say, in my understanding at least, since Gevuros Atik also is the force that created existence and the force that created diversity, you have to say Yud Gimel Midas HaRachmim is even deeper in Gevuros Atik, even though he didn't say it. Because here you're going further than just creation. You're coming to repair a blemish. You're coming to repair a wound, the sins that Yud Gimel Midas HaRachmim. But I'm sure he's going to discuss this as well. But the point is that he explained now how Yud Gimel Midas HaRachmim is rooted in this type of very intense level that is Gevuros of Atik as it manifests in Meiches Stima'ah. So before I continue, I'll stop if anybody wants any clarification or questions. So let's continue. Remember, he asked the question, Lama Yikro Yugimo Midas HaRachmim on page 1334. First line of the paragraph, new paragraph there. It says, since they come down in a diminished form like Cyrus, why are they called Yud Gimel Midas HaRachmim? So he says, yes, it is coming from Gvura. But the second meaning in Gvura, intensity. The intensity, the core intensity, the intensity that comes from the core source. That's where Midas HaRachmim come from. That's even higher than Chesed. So instead, the first meaning in Gvura is Tzimtzum and Miut. That's a diminished flow where you're having very limited flow, like we learned earlier, and even mentioned it before on this page when he talked about the Tzimtzum in order to come into the Esser spheres Hagluyas, the revealed spheres. But here we're talking about Gevuros of Atik as they are Tagbeirus Atzmus. So it's actually even greater than Chesed. So again, Shazal B'chinas Gili Er Har B'Yeser. This is a far greater energy, Naili Yeser, and higher energy. The Gili, in a revealed way, compared to Minham Shachad the B'chinas Chesed, in comparison or contrast to the transmission that comes from Chesed. As we learned before, Chesed is more defined. Chesed flow ceases. It's more limited, whereas this is coming from that essential intensity. V'nimshach ad lamata mata, which is always what he's bringing, the intensity, which also causes it to flow all the way down to the darkest levels, even to the place of sins. V'agam shaboyin b'bchinas tischalkus b'bchinas Cyrus. And though, okay, so you're explaining that it's rooted in this intensity, but the actual flow is coming in a form of ischalkus, division, in a form of sidus, very narrow flow. So it's coming from this very intense place. And he's explaining now what this means, this narrow flow that manifests in v'hu hadigduk sheyesh behem. The lemi nesi oven lemisha ever al pesha. My understanding of what he's saying is that when God forgives from this level, it's not just a blanket forgiveness, but it's a digduk. You're specifically focusing on the person who did the sin and his particular needs. How's that focus happening? Because it's coming from a very intense place, but it's not just like a makivdik energy that just covers and blankets everyone. It's specifically geared, and that's what the role of the Cyrus are. It's geared Yud Gimel Midasach, Yud Gimel Tikune Dikna. It's geared toward the individual who sinned. We learned this earlier, that God gives this forgiveness to someone that is specifically doing tshuva. In other words, it's not just a blanket forgiveness. There is an element here of this. What's the word I want to use? Discernment and discretion. Maybe that's the word. Discernment is a good word. V'zeu shenikra, the next page. Let me continue reading and I'll explain. And on page 1338, next page, v'zeu shenikra midas. That's why we call them midas harachamim. Midas right away means shezein b'bchinas medida. Means there's a form of measure here, but not the medida that we learned earlier, the medida of chesed, which is a measure true mida in oyer, which is a mida mamish. That's what he says. Achamedida behem hu medida atzmius. However, it's measured and it's coming down in a specific way to the people according to their needs, the people who sinned, but it's a medida atzmius, and that's so Yud Gimel Midas Harachmim is not just a flow from this higher place. It actually is being channeled like Cyrus, the 13 attributes like Cyrus, like the thin wires of the hairs. But the medida is not a regular measure. It's the medida atzmis we learned. Kamei ha-medida is the Teira. Remember I explained that the medidas of Teira, not of the world, physical world, daimim, sameach, chai medaber, the distinctions and the diversity of nature, or everything in existence is true measure. A tree is not a flower, and a flower is not an apple is not an animal, etc., etc. But the measurements in Torah and in mitzvahs, he only mentions Torah here, but the measurements in Torah, remember, is God choosing to manifest himself in these details. And that's not a medida mamish, that's a medida atzmis, that is God is choosing that now the medida, Torah says, a measure that this is a shear of a tefach, of a certain measure, or an amma, a different measure, that these measurements are actually core essential measurements that God is simply choosing to manifest in measurement, as opposed to an actual parameters of the definitions that are in creation. And this medida atzmis that we find in Torah is even increasingly so, even more so in Yud Gimel Midas Harachmim. So on one hand, it's rachamim, and it's coming with an intensity even greater than chesed from Gevuros of Atik, but it also comes through Mocha Stima'ah, and ultimately through the Cyrus, and the Cyrus give it essentially they direct it and give it some form of channeling and focus. So it is coming in medida, midas harachamim, but it's still medida atzmis, as he explained earlier. Difference between medida atzmis and regular medida, regular measure. And what does that mean? Shebekol chelek hu gili era atzmis. Every part, even though it's coming in parts, every section is a gili is a core essential energy. The lamaylim abchinas mida. So it's a measure that's really higher than measure. So in measure, in the structure, you're getting something that's beyond structure, like we discussed earlier. Like in a way, like the Mocha not exactly that, because that's complete kol yachol, but here it has a component that it does come into Yud Gimel Sachem and directed to the place it needs to be directed. But what you're getting is like the man. Remember he said about the man, The man on one hand had substance, but on the other hand was not measurable. It was beyond measure, beyond structure. So again, this is an abstract concept, but this is what he's saying. Again, I'll stop here. Any clarification wanted or needed?
I have a question. Is the Yud Gimel Midas Rachma that goes through the cyrus? Is that merely a muscle, or there's some actually going through somebody's beard? I mean, which level is it, or both? I don't know.
Well, as I explained at length, everything in the physical world mirrors the spiritual. In the physical world, the hairs, like the payas, or the hair on the head, or the beard, are physical, obviously. But in their root, in their spiritual root, where they originate from, Tzelem Elokim, they're obviously spiritual entities. And their parallel is that just like it is here is very thin strands, the same as the idea that Elokus goes through tzimtzumim, diminishments and flow, and it's called Cyrus of the Yud Gimel Tikkun Dikna, the Cyrus through which Gevuros of Atik manifest through Mocha Stima'ah, and from there, Mocha comes these channels into the lower levels. So I'm not asking, you asking me if it's physical or spiritual? Of course it's spiritual, but it's a similar idea. There's no physical here.
It is basically a muscle, that's what.
I wouldn't say it's a muscle at all. I would say it's actually a physical manifestation of what it is in the spiritual world. A muscle is a foreign example. I give an example from a bottle of ketchup for a certain idea. Here, the muscle evolves from the nimshal. The muscle is simply the physical manifestation of that spiritual reality. Remember, in Chassidus, the mishalim, when you say something is a muscle below for above, it's not just an example. It's actual that level as it manifests in the physical. Like when you say fire comes from gvura or water from chesed. So of course, chesed and gvura are not water and fire, but from them evolve water and fire, and their properties are similar, except on a spiritual level, like a spiritual archetype versus a physical prototype or physical manifestation. This is, in general, everything is that way.
So someone without a beard, like
when we say human being is created in the divine image, when you say human being is created in the divine image, what does the divine image look like? It doesn't look like the human being. The human being is a reflection on a physical plane. Soul and body reflect the structure of the divine image. Just like he says in Tanya, the 10 human faculties, nishtalshal, evolved from the 10 divine attributes called the 10 spheres. I mean, this is not necessarily around what we're learning here. This is just a general principle throughout things go from Atzilus, Bri, Yitzir, Asiya. That's the way it's structured.
Yeah, but somebody without a beard or even a woman, it wouldn't affect their tshuva. I mean, it's just that's what I meant. It's not. That's
a nice question. But and what about the child or somebody that can't grow a beard, as you said? That still doesn't mean they don't have hair. This is not about the beard. This is not about growing a beard here. This is about channels of energy that everybody can receive and anybody can access. One of the reasons that growing a beard is conducive to drawing it's like a bracha. It's the bracha of Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim. That's one of the reasons we grow a beard. But that's like anything in life. It's because someone doesn't grow a beard doesn't mean they're not going to get Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim. It's a very different question you're asking now.
Okay, thank you.
I have a couple of questions. So the Rebbeim here, and I say plural because this is coming not just from the Rebbe Rashabi, he said from the Alter Rebbe, and some Tzedek comments on it as well, but they're sort of describing the mechanism through which forgiveness occurs by the Eibishter. And one question is, well, so this may be the mechanism, but still God has to decide to do it. So there has to be some voluntary thing. It's not just like the human being somehow taps into a network or some machine and somehow presses a button and then they get the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim. I mean, the Eibishter has to
how the process works?
This describes how the process works. How does it start? That's number one. Number two.
So let's just go to Chumash. That's the whole Pasha Kisisa that he's quoting here tells us how it started. The Jews had sinned. They built a golden calf. Moshe Rabbeinu broke the tablets. He went up to the mountain and he began to pray and besiege God. At some point, he elicited from God these higher levels, the Yud Gimel Midas HaRachamim. God told him to stand on the rock, spaces with me, and I will now reveal to you. So this is exactly what is explaining how it happened. Moshe kept praying to God and ultimately got these Yud Gimel Midas HaRachamim, which ultimately created Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, which we have till this day, that now we can access deeper strengths that Moshe Rabbeinu, in his credit, Salachti Kidvarecha, he was able to draw out of God. And that's now the mechanism of hope and tshuva and so on. So that's exactly what the Psukim come to talk about, how it came about. And now, in our case, there are different scenarios. It could be initiated through tshuva, the person does tshuva, but we also learned it could be initiated from above. For example, when Yom Kippur comes, or Shaf Shefer Gadol, even though it's a koyach nelam, nobody feels it, but even someone that hit rock bottom and is a lost soul, something in that darkness lies this deeper level of Yud Gimel Midas HaRachamim that is there with him because of Gevuros of Atik that embedded it into existence. So there's different scenarios how people have wake-up calls. It can come from chesed, it can come from an epiphany, like we learned, it can come from or it can come from the depths of darkness. That's part of what we're learning here. That's exactly what we're discussing.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. The Inyan Hatzur. Now he's going back to the rock. And this is the Inyan of the rock. We're going back to page 1334. We spoke about Nitzavta Latzur. Bechinas Butzina D'Kardunisa. Remember, Butzina means Eish or Nitzutz, a spark or flame. Kardunisa can either mean dark or it can mean hard, like a rock. And dark, because remember, it's a state of concealment in the Helam, like we learned before, the Helam of now he's going to explain how it's the same level as the Reshimu. It's like the Tzur, is like the flintstone. That's the source of fire, but it's not actual fire. So I'm just reading back on page 1334, the bottom of 1333. Okay. She says, what level is that? Gevuros of Atik, hamalubish b'meiches Stima'ah. Shemisham nimshachim yud gimel tikkunei dikner canal. So it's this dark or hard flame or spark, the level of Gevuros of Atik, the intensities of Atik, that manifest the meiches Stima'ah. From there, animshachim are drawn or extend the 13 strands of dikna, of the zokan, of the beard, which is the Yud Gimel Midas HaRachamim, like we spoke before about. Again, back to page 1334. So this is now concluding the ideas he began speaking there. Now he continues explaining the pasuk. The Hiraloi, and God showed this to Moshe Rabbeinu. The Hiraloi Esam, he showed these Yud Gimel Midas HaRachamim, he showed it to him, al yedei shehit min nishmosei b'Nikras Tzur, by hiding his neshama in the crevice that he engraved in the rock, like the pasuk continues, where he says, "And I will place you in this crevice in the rock, so when my covet will pass and you'll see me, you'll be able to experience." But it's Nikras Tzur means it's in a concealed state. Nikras B'chinas Pnimius, shehu nelam mizgalus. It's an inner state, an inward state, an intimate state that's concealed from any revelation. And that's the root of all existence, of everything that will come into existence. Like he spoke about Hanal, again, back in 1334, if you look at the line, in the 5th or 6th line, Shoshe Kol Yisava, Shoshe Avoya, and he brought also from the Meir Nevuchim. So this is the root of everything, but it's all in a state of concealed state, not in a revealed state. And that's where Mocha is now placed. So Mocha is basically placed in this Nikras Tzur in the helm of the Gevuros of Atik. Upirash Nikras. So Nikras means literally crevice. So he's going to bring a pasuk from Yeshaya. Yeshaya Nun Aleph Aleph, 51a. Hu Meloshen, and the pasuk goes like this. There he's talking about that you will remember. He's talking about Avram and Sarah. Let me. I want to see it inside a second. Give me a moment.
$51,1.
51:1, yeah.
Shimu alai rodfei tzedek mevakshe Hashem ibitu alatzur.
Yeah. So he says like this. So he says, Shimu alai rodfei tzedek. So listen to me or hearken to me, the pursuers of righteousness, mevakshe Hashem, seekers of the Lord. He says like this: Habitu el sur chatzaftem. El makeves boir nukartem, which means look at the rock from where you were graved or from where you were hewn, and the hole of the pit from where you were dug. And then he says, Hibitol Avram avichim vel Sarah. Look at Avram, your father, and Sarah, who bore you. So the Rebbe Rashab, this is really from the Maimer from the Alter Rebbe, but he's basically saying Nikras is from that same word, Nukartem. And it says also of Al Makeves Boir. So you see here that we're talking about a like a crevice or a hole in the rock and in the pit from where you were created. That's the source. From that's Yeshai. That's where Makeves Boir is Nukartem. The Koi Al Sarah. And it refers to Sarah, like in the next pasuk. So what is that? What's the example? What is Sarah connected to this? This is the womb, from where birth comes. So the womb is like a crevice. The womb is like a space, the womb, from which gives birth a child. So basically, he's comparing Sarah's womb to the Eibishter's creating a space. And he says that's where you are to look at that rock, where there's that space and that hole. And that's what this is referring to. Actually, I think you asked the question, Yitzchak, about whether womb can be used as an example. Well, here he's bringing clearly Rechem, womb as an example here. Shememeno hayiloda. Okay, so let's just spell it out a bit more. So now, when it says to the Eibishter says that when I'll pass, my covet will pass by. You will be Nikras Tzur. I will place you, like he said, the Samticha. Said that before. Samticha benikras Tzur. What are we referring to? We're referring to in Ruchnius is the level of Gevuros of Atik, which is a nikras. It's a hole, meaning like the mokim. It's a space that is empty. That's a space that is dark and concealed. Like we said, it's a fundamentally concealed state. And he's bringing the pasuk Yeshaya that just confirms that, and also explains what is this analogy. Why is God saying in Yeshaya that those pursuers of righteousness and seekers of the Lord, what do you mean looking at the rock? What are you looking at exactly? He's telling us that Hashem is saying, look at the rock, look at the place where you originated from. Look at the womb from where I created you. What is that womb? That is the concealed place in the rock, which is the root of everything. That's the Nikras Tzur that Moshe Rabbeinu was placed in, from where God will now reveal the Yud Gimel Midas Harachim. Now, all this is, obviously, you see the brilliance of the Alter Rebbe, how he's taking a pasuk, simple psukim, but cryptic ones, and interpreting them in the context of what we're learning here. Okay. V'im kain, says the Rebbe Rashab, haynu b'chinas yesei de nukve. So if that's the case, if it's like the womb of Sarah, so nukve is Malchus. Yesod nukve is the womb within Malchus. But as the Rebbe Rashab is prone to do, he grounds things in Kabbalistic terminology. So let's not be thrown by that. Right now, he's more placing the levels before he explains what the level is. So he says, well, according to what it says in the Pardes, the Tzur hu bina, there he teaches Tzur is bina. That's not Malchus. So the truth is, we now have Tzur being Gevuros of Atik. Now he says Tzur is Malchus and it's Yesod of Malchus. But that's not a pella because Malchus of a higher level becomes the Atik of the lower level. We'll soon see. Now he says in the Pardes, it says Tzur is bina, the level of bina. Imkein Nikras Tzur. So what's Nikras Tzur? So there it's Yesod Malchus according to that. Yesod Malchus, which is the space within the rock. According to the Pardes, Nikras Tzur, who Yesod the Ima. Yesod, now why is it Yesod? Because Yesod is a foundation. Yesod is, in this case, is like the crevice within it. So here it would be Yesod of Bina according to the Pardes. So according to what he said before, from the Pasuk in Yeshaya, that would be Yesod of Malchus. Now it's Yesod of Bina, of Ima. And here's the third. And according to what we learned earlier, the Tzur of Gevuros the Atik. So now we have the first interpretation is Gevuros of Atik, Hanikra Butzina D'Kardunisa, which is the level of Butzina D'Kardunisa, the heart or the concealed flame or spark. Mavur bezoyer harakia al hamayim de Bereshis daf tezvav. So we learned in Zoyer Rakia on the Maimon Bereshis on Beresh Romanissa de Malka, and we learned this earlier on page 1330. What did he say there? The Yesod, the Malchus, the Ein Sof Nikra Butzina D'Kardunisa. So now we have the Yesod of Malchus of Ein Sof, that's called Butzina D'Kardunisa. V'ayin sham, and look there, Shezeo B'chinas HaReshimu, that's the level of the Reshimu. Shanishra Acharat Simtzum U'Kamosh Nizbar Le'el Mishmoi. So this is the level of the Shema that remained after the Tzimtzum. As we discussed earlier on page 1330, Mishmoi in the name of the Zoyer HaRakia. V'im Kain, and according to that, B'chinas Gevuros Atik Hu Meb'chinas HaReshimu. So then Gevuros Atik is from the level of the Reshimu. And we learned earlier on page 1334 that that's Tzur, the rock, in its root is the Reshimu. Okay. So I understand, firstly, there are three interpretations on what Tzur is. It's either Malchus, and Nikras Tzur is Yesod Malchus. It's either Bina, according to the Pardes, and Nikras Tzur is Yesod Bina. And based on this Maimer, it's Gevuros the Atik, and it's the Yesod, what he says, the Yesod of Malchus of Ein Sof. So it's similar to the first interpretation, but Malchus of Ein Sof. And that's Butzina D'Kardunisa, that's the Reshimu, and that's the Tzur. So Nikras Tzur is in the Reshimu, which is all Butzina D'Kardunisa, and associates with the Malchus with Malchus. Okay, I'm going to stop here because this is dense enough. So the bottom line is, he's now explained in the context of the verses in Kisisa that the story, the narrative, where Hashem is placing Moshe in the rock, the crevice in the rock, is essentially the story of what we're discussing here, that Yud Gimel Midas HaRachman, that God is revealing, needs to come from a very high, intense level called Gevuros Atik. That's the punchline. The deeper level, higher than Chesed, from where comes this deeper level of Gvura. And that has the power to transform the Gvuras into sweetness from within, as we're going to get back to later. That's basically what he began speaking about in the bottom of page 1333. Yeah, the Gilead of the Helama Atzmi B'Re Inyan, and that's that. And this is the level of the Reshimu, which is a concealed state that has everything within it, but the Etzem Nekudas Reshimu, not the Avir, not the Oyer Yud, not the Yud within the Reshimu, but not the Yud within the Reshimu, but the Etzem Nekudas Reshimu is the very Gevuras themselves, not the Oyer within it. the very concealment itself, Helma Atzmi. So that's really what he's just saying, but now we understand it in the verses, and he connected it to these Maimorim. But there's more to go, but I'll stop here. Any questions?
Is this tapping into the creation process itself? Meaning to say, is this the same mechanism through which the world comes into being originally? Meaning the tshuva is retracing the steps.
I understand. I explained it earlier that you probably, I addressed this around 15, 20 minutes ago, where I said the following. First, he explained why you need Gvura, even though creation comes from Chesed, you need Gvura to create the intensity of the flow, that it should come all the way into Atzilus and Bria and create diversity. So there it's the process of creation. That's where Gvura is needed. Based on that concept, he then went and said, same thing with Tshuva, or Yud Gimel Midas HaRachamim, also needs to access that level of Gevuros of Atik. So I explained that you have to say that's going even deeper, because if creation is coming from Gevuros of Atik, the intensity, and that's even without sins, but if you need to repair sins, you're going even lower. So clearly it's a deeper dimension of Gevuros of Atik, just like Tshuva is deeper than regular Avodah. When you do regular Avodah, you also have access to some extent to those higher levels. So essentially it's the process of creation on one level, and then we go deeper into Gevuros of Atik to access the power of Yud Gimel Midas Harach. That's what I said a little earlier.
Yeah, I got it. No, it makes more sense. Yeah, it's a lot to digest, but yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Especially with all these Kabbalistic references, it's very cryptic.
Yeah, it's very dense, also very short and sweet. Okay. Well, listen, I will elaborate. We'll go over it again and again. And you have to distinguish between the places where he explains it and where he's grounding it in the actual levels. So just need to know how to dance from one to the next, because when he explains the actual levels, he doesn't necessarily explain the whole depth behind it. He's just like placing, so but right now for sure, Butzina D'Kardunisa and Gevuros of Atik and Yesod of Malchus of Ein Sof and Reshimu are all essentially the same level. Pretty much what he's saying. I should say in some places it says Butzina D'Kardunisa is the Kav Hamida. But you have to say it's the Kav as it's influenced by the Reshimu, but I don't want to go into that right now. It'll just confuse matters. Okay.
That's why Tshuva is so amazing. I mean, it actually erases. It goes down to the level where it didn't happen. It's gone. It's an unbelievable process.
Right. Okay, any other questions? Okay, so we'll stop here. I didn't want to stop in the middle, but it's just going to be too complicated if I continue here. But we'll stop here. We'll go over it tomorrow again. So on top of, we're in the middle of, we're like a third of the way on top of page 1338.